Winter, 1945. The forests of eastern France stood frozen in silence, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. The German army, battered but unbroken, was gathering strength near the small French village of Holzwehr. For the men of the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division, exhaustion had become their shadow. Among them stood a young lieutenant barely out of his teens, Audie Leon Murphy. He was small in stature, quiet in demeanor, and barely 20 years old, but within his frame lived the will of an entire army. By January, the war had reached its most desperate stage. Hitler's forces had launched a final counteroffensive, the Battle of the Bulge, and though it was failing, the remnants of German resistance still struck with vicious precision. Holzwehr was one such place. On the 26th of January, Murphy's company, C Company, took defensive positions along a forest edge. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and dangerously low on supplies. Before them lay open ground, snow-covered fields stretching into the distance. Somewhere beyond that white emptiness, German panzer units were moving. The sky hung low with smoke and the smell of frozen mud. The men dug in, waiting for the inevitable. By midday, the storm came. 6 Tiger tanks and waves of German infantry surged out from the treeline, their engines growling like monsters beneath the snow. The ground trembled. The first shells tore through the American positions, throwing earth, metal, and bodies into the air. Murphy's men fought back fiercely, but their rifles and machine guns could barely scratch the advancing armor. Within minutes, their defenses began to crumble. Realizing the situation was hopeless, Murphy ordered his men to retreat to the forest. "Fall back," he shouted over the thunder of explosions, "and keep low." But he did not move. Instead, he stayed behind, alone, to direct artillery fire. Standing in the open, with shells bursting around him, he called out coordinates over the radio, bringing down the weight of American artillery upon the enemy. The air was filled with fire and snow. German troops closed in, their bullets slicing through the smoke. Murphy's carbine jammed, his position shattered. He looked to his side and saw a burning tank destroyer, its .50 caliber machine gun still mounted, still functional, its crew dead inside. Without hesitation, he climbed aboard. Flames licked at his boots as he gripped the smoking barrel and opened fire. What followed became legend. For nearly an hour, Audie Murphy held his ground against more than 200 German soldiers. He fired until his ammunition was gone, his gun overheating and the tank beneath him threatening to explode. He was wounded in the leg, yet refused to fall back. His voice over the radio remained calm, cold, and exact. "They're right on top of me," he said. "Keep firing." German troops tried to flank him, but he cut them down one after another. Smoke mixed with snow, turning the battlefield into a surreal landscape of fire and ash. When at last his position ran dry, Murphy climbed down, limping, bloodied, exhausted, and led his remaining men in a counterattack. Against all odds, the Germans retreated. When it was over, Holzwehr stood silent again. The ground was littered with wreckage, burning tanks, twisted guns, and fallen soldiers. Audie Murphy stood among them, his face pale, his hands trembling from the heat of battle. He had fought alone, held the line, and turned the tide. For his actions that day, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. But even as the medal shone and the cameras flashed, Murphy himself remained haunted. He once said, "I killed so many men that day, I can't sleep without seeing their faces." When the war finally ended, he returned home not as a hero, but as a man forever changed. He carried the silence of Holzwehr with him, a silence that no applause could ever fill. Audie Murphy went on to become one of America's most decorated soldiers and later an actor, but beneath the fame, he remained what he had always been, a soldier who refused to give up, even when the world around him burned. His story was not about glory. It was about courage born in despair, about a single man standing against the impossible, and proving that sometimes history is written not by armies, but by the heart of one man who simply refuses to die. The guns of Europe finally fell silent in May 1945, the world celebrated peace. But for Audie Murphy, the quiet was louder than any battlefield. The boy who had faced down tanks alone at Holzwehr returned to a nation that called him a hero, yet he carried inside him a war that never truly ended. He was 20 years old, too young to drink, too young to vote, but old enough to have seen more death than most men could imagine. Parades greeted him when he came home to Texas. Reporters crowded his family farm, photographers begged for his smile, and his name was printed in newspapers across the country. To the world, he was the embodiment of American courage, the farm boy who had defied an army and survived. But behind the medals and the headlines, Murphy was uneasy. Fame was supposed to bring peace, but it only reminded him of the noise he couldn't escape. Every firework, every thunderclap, every engine backfire dragged him back to the frozen woods of France. He tried to return to normal life, but normal no longer existed. Nights were the hardest. He slept with a loaded pistol beside his bed, haunted by the ghosts of the men he had killed and the ones he couldn't save. He often woke drenched in sweat, certain he was still under attack. Doctors called it battle fatigue. Today we call it post-traumatic stress disorder. In those days, there was no understanding, no therapy, only silence, and Murphy carried that silence like a second skin. Hollywood came calling in 1948. The studios saw not a wounded veteran, but a symbol, a perfect American hero for a new age. He was offered small roles at first, then bigger ones. He played cowboys, soldiers, outlaws, men who looked like him, men who hid pain behind quiet eyes. Yet it was his own story that defined him. In 1955, Universal Pictures released To Hell and Back, based on Murphy's wartime memoir. Against all odds, the young lieutenant played himself. The film was raw and unfiltered. Audie relived his battles on screen. Every explosion, every death, every moment of unbearable courage. The audience saw a hero, he saw ghosts. During filming, he often had to walk off set, his hands shaking as old memories flooded back. The movie became a box office sensation, the highest-grossing war film in American history at the time. But for Murphy, its success only deepened the wound. It made him famous again for the very thing he was trying to forget. Off-screen, he was restless. The medals he once wore with pride were now locked away in drawers. He spoke publicly about the hidden scars of war, long before the world had words for them. He urged the government to take care of returning soldiers, to treat their minds with the same care as their wounds. He used his fame to advocate for others, even when it cost him roles and endorsements. That courage, the quiet, moral kind, was the same that had kept him alive on the battlefield. Yet, his life remained a battle of its own. Financial troubles, insomnia, and the weight of memory followed him like shadows. He gambled recklessly, worked tirelessly, and trusted few. Still, those who knew him spoke of his discipline, his integrity, and the strange gentleness beneath his hardened exterior. He never glorified war. "There's nothing noble about killing," he once said, "nothing at all." On May 28, 1971, Audie Murphy boarded a small private plane bound for Virginia. Somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains, the aircraft vanished into heavy fog. When rescuers finally found the wreckage, there were no survivors. He was 45 years old. America mourned the loss of a hero, but for many veterans, his death felt like the end of an era, the passing of one of their own who had spoken their pain aloud. Today, his grave lies at Arlington National Cemetery, one of the most visited in the United States. Tourists come to see the name engraved on the white marble, unaware that beneath it rests a man who once carried an army's burden on his shoulders. But for those who know his story, the legacy of Audie Murphy is not measured by medals or movies. It lives in the truth he left behind, that heroism is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. He proved that courage is not born in glory, but in struggle, that greatness comes not from power, but from endurance, and that even the smallest man, in the darkest hour, can hold back the tide of history. Audie Murphy was more than a soldier. He was a reminder that even in the ruins of war, humanity can still find its strength, one heart at a time.